In our previous study, we began to look at Exodus chapter 3 verses 10 to 22. We didn't complete all that we would have liked to have said there, so here I would like to pick up those verses and explain further what they have to teach us. God's reply to Moses seeking fresh knowledge of God is recorded, as we have seen, in verses 14 and 15. God repeats his name, known and used by his people for many years before, but here he explains its meaning. His name, he says, is Yahweh, and he reminds Moses that this means I am. Christians have for a long time discussed the exact meaning of God's reply. Some have concluded that the answer is no real answer at all. They suggest that God says, I will be the person I will prove to be. However, it's more likely that a clear answer to Moses' question was given, and that verse 15 is intended to provide it. God's reply to Moses was intended to emphasize that he will be the ever-present and faithful God, just as he had been with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when he made such great promises to them. One of the New Testament writers makes the same point about Jesus, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. You might consult Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. Assured now of God's presence, Moses was commanded by the Lord to go to the children of Israel. He was to tell them, God has promised, God has heard, God will deliver. He was also assured that his message would be well received. The life of many believers and churches would be transformed if they too built their faith on God and his promises. Yet we so often fail altogether, although we can have a greater knowledge of God, than Moses ever had in Jesus. To the reader who lives in Western society, the next part of the story often creates difficulties. Moses was commanded to go to Pharaoh and demand not freedom, but a 3 days journey into the desert for a religious festival. This, it is suggested, was dishonest of Moses because he was really seeking nothing less than complete freedom. However, readers who live in other parts of the world will see little difficulty here. They will be familiar with the complicated bargaining procedure in their own societies and will recognize Moses' demands for complete freedom in these words. Moses was speaking politely. However, he was asking to go 3 days' journey beyond the Egyptian frontier. Pharaoh would have known from the start that this implied that the people would never return. After all, they were only tolerated immigrants. Pharaohs would have had no claim on them once they had left his land. Pharaoh was, of course, the most powerful man in the ancient world. He was also recognized as a god. It would have been quite natural for him to assume that the God of a slaved people was inferior to him and the gods of Egypt. Only after clear proof that this was not so would he submit to the demands of the slave people's God. The Lord knew this and warned Moses that this would be the case. Moses was about to enter a battlefield, and yet the victory was assured. Pharaoh would be forced to submit to the Lord's demands, and the Egyptians would willingly hand over their treasures to the followers of such a powerful God. The victory for Moses was certain, but the path to it would be far from easy. This is something we need to learn. The New Testament reminds us many, many times that the disciples of the Lord Jesus are on the victorious side. Equally often, those same scriptures remind us that victory is never achieved except through long, difficult and painful battles. Sin and the devil, our greatest enemies, do not willingly give up their power, just as Pharaoh was reluctant to do so. Just as Moses had to rely by faith on the promises of God in dark days of apparent defeat, so must we.